We are coming up on the anniversary of the historic Abraham Accords, which seem to be still holding on, even given all the unrest in the Middle East. Joining us now on the KVI studio line, one of the architects of that monumental achievement, author of the book, Let My People Know, which I read and thoroughly enjoyed, and you should buy a copy as well. Aryeh Lightstone, welcome back to the show.
Oh, great to be back, Ari. You are doing the Lord's work over here.
Thanks so much. That means a lot coming from you. So we're looking at the anniversary of the Abraham Accords coming up, and I'm looking at now Iran is rearing its ugly head again. Now, I see two ways this can go. Either this is going to be the precursor to more agreements, or the Obama administration is going to go back to placating Iran. I mean, the Biden administration, sorry, Obama part 2, is going to go back to placating Iran. I can see from the tea leaves what direction that's going in. But isn't this an opportunity to bring even more countries in now that Iran is a threat again?
The answer is yes, and your misspeak was actually accurate. This is definitely the Biden administration, certainly as it applies to Iran and the Middle East. And it's incredibly disappointing that the Abraham Accords haven't expanded. The other disappointing piece is we're also coming across the anniversary of the Afghanistan debacle. And we remember that because we certainly remember the 13 soldiers who needlessly lost their lives, but it's also the day before the anniversary of the first time the Biden administration used the term the Abraham Accords, immediately after the Afghanistan debacle. And right now, after strengthening Iran for 3 years, there are murmurings and rumors that they're going to try to put Israel and Saudi Arabia together, which would be the ultimate normalization.
So if that actually happens, that would be based on the work you guys did. I got to ask, what took them so long? It seemed like when you guys left office, when the Trump administration left office, it was just, well, let's pick them off here, here, here. We can make all these peace deals and just keep this train going. And then it just stopped, and the Biden administration went back to talking about the Iran nuclear deal.
Yeah, so I'll be clear. If there's a normalization agreement that happens in the appropriate way, I will cheer it on and I will praise the president as the praise he will deserve. I'm not confident that this will happen, and I'm certainly not confident that it will happen correctly, really for the following 3 reasons. Number one is you're correct. It should have gone boom, boom, boom in terms of other countries that wanted to join the Abraham Accords. Because of President Trump and Jared Kushner's leadership, the lexicon in the Middle East went from not will you ever make peace with Israel, but when will you make peace with Israel? And President Biden poured cold water all over that when at his inaugural address, he announced his intention to go back into the Iran deal, strengthen Iran, and to make Saudi Arabia a pariah nation. When you want to make somebody a pariah nation, it is hard to envision the picture on the White House lawn holding Prime Minister Netanyahu's hand with one hand and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, MBS's hand, with the other hand, and somehow think that that's a good picture. Couple that with the fact that Prime Minister Netanyahu became the Prime Minister again now more than 8.5 months ago and is yet to receive an official invitation to Washington, D.C., I'd be hard-pressed to imagine his first trip to D.C. with President Biden will be that of forming peace with Saudi Arabia, although that would be a very cool first trip.
We're talking with Aryeh Lightstone, who's the author of Let My People Know, the incredible story of Middle East peace and what lies ahead, one of the architects of the Abraham Accords. So when we're looking at what's going on with Iran right now, or looking on what's going on with Israel right now, with Israel having a bit of an internal conflict over this judicial reform and everybody in the world thinking they know better than Israel, the question is, the Biden administration has spoken very heavily against this judicial reform process. Is that going to stand in the way of the peace in the Middle East, possibly anything with Saudi Arabia?
The worst part about the Biden administration interfering inappropriately in Israel's domestic policy is that demonstrates a weakness or projects a weakness for Israel. Now, Israel's enemies should not at all take that message the way it's intended by Biden, that Israel is weak. President Herzog, who spoke to the joint session of Congress, was exceptionally clear about that. Do not test Israel, and I believe Israel, as our number one ally in the Middle East, should not be tested. But when President Biden interferes in Israeli domestic policy, he's asking for them to look weaker. And in the Middle East, you're either weak or you're dead. So certainly it does not help the prospect for peace. And I would have to tell you, I think it creates an immediate danger for our ally Israel. So that's sort of point number one. Point number two is that praising Iran, raising up Iran. I don't know if you've been tracking the story with Mali. You know, Rob, the leader of the Iran deal, lost his security clearance months ago, and nobody's told Congress why. And this was the person who was leading our deal with Iran. It's very suspicious.
So if this guy loses his security clearance, that on top of the things you mentioned with Afghanistan, that on top of them failing to do anything in the Middle East of substance, trying to get back into the Iran deal, and now today we're sending warships to Alaska because it seems like we're being challenged by everybody on the planet. Is this actually the best time to actually go into a peace process like this, or does it will just be taken as, well, Biden needed a foreign policy win?
I think that point, look, I'm going to root for peace in all situations, but I have to tell you, peace is negotiated from a position of strength, not from a position of weakness. So whatever that deal looks like, will be inherently different than a deal than if the United States of America and Israel were coming from a position of strength. And to me, that's terrible, because when the U.S. and Israel are diminished, somebody else takes their place. It's not surprising that the biggest deal brokered in the Middle East over the last 2 years was the reconciliation between Iran and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, brokered by China.
Wow. Just wow. And that's worrisome because China becomes a world leader through things like that. I mean, look at all the stuff going on with the U.S. dollar and how that's being affected as well. In the last few minutes we have with Aryeh Lightstone, author of the book, Let My People Know, The Incredible Story of Middle East Peace and What Lies Ahead, one of the architects of the Abraham Accords. Before the Trump administration left office, I assume you guys had a few-year plan, you know, for the next 4 years. What was the plan? What was the order of the countries going to be? Was it going to be Saudi Arabia first, or were there other ones that kind of came out of nowhere, like Bahrain, for example, that we were going to get, and then most likely that would have led to Saudi Arabia and the Abraham Accords?
So here's the biggest advantage of this. We didn't negotiate in public. And because we didn't negotiate in public, we were able to have incoming calls instead of outgoing calls. Amongst the brilliance of Jared Kushner is he called it the Abraham Accords, which meant that after the first phone call, which was August 13, 2020, as soon as that call was hung up, it was called the Abraham Accords. It's great to be first, but you sure want to be second. You don't want to be third. So that we were fielding a bunch of calls from countries who say, hey, peace is part of the future of the Middle East, and this is actually part of the secret sauce. When the road to Washington, D.C. goes through Jerusalem, when we acknowledge that the United States of America is the undisputed superpower in the world, and the way to get a closer relationship with us is through our closest ally in the region, Israel, peace will happen for free. The second we don't value both of those things, we don't treat ourselves like a superpower, and we knock the only democracy in the Middle East by interfering in their domestic policy, suddenly to create peace you have to pay. And that's a disastrous response on behalf of the American people.
And that seems to be exactly what's happening right now. Aryeh Lightstone, the book is Let My People Know, The Incredible Story of Middle East Peace and What Lies Ahead, which is on my nightstand. I enjoyed it thoroughly. You should go pick up a copy of it yourself. Rabbi Lightstone, thank you so much for joining us today. Do appreciate it.